Welcome back. We're now on the second episode of The Gamer Going Gray. First, I would like to thank anyone who showed their support for my first foray into video reviews. Your kind words across the board was truly the impetus to continue this. And yes, I may still be relatively young, but with a kid on the way, the graying in my hair that began when I was 20 has started to accelerate. Soon it may match the color of these Super Nintendo games. This one's a bit different.
This odd red cartridge is Maximum Carnage, or to be precise, Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage. Developed by Software Creations and published by LJN, Maximum Carnage was released for both the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis in both red and standard cartridges. Somewhat unique among comic-based games, Maximum Carnage doesn't feature a newly created story, but instead adapts the storyline from its namesake, the Maximum Carnage crossover miniseries.
As a kid, I had no idea about this particular game's existence, but I was aware of the comics it was based off of. Had I known about the crossover, I would have surely jumped on the chance to play. The few issues that I read as a kid piqued my interest enough that I picked up the whole series years later.
Maximum Carnage was a comic event series that spanned through all 4 of the monthly Spider-Man comic titles at the time, as well as started up the Spider-Man Unlimited series. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt that you know who Spider-Man and Venom are, but you may be unfamiliar with Carnage. Carnage is a result of a torn-off piece of alien symbiote costume that bonded with Cletus Cassidy, a lunatic serial killer. After his origin, he was defeated by the combined power of both Spider-Man and Venom, and then locked away. The miniseries starts with Carnage gaining his powers back, escaping the asylum, and going on a killing spree just because. This ginger truly has no soul. On the way, he is joined by a number of other Spider-Man adversaries that become Carnage's posse, or as they continue stating in the comics, family. In the end, it takes teamwork of Spider-Man, Venom, a half dozen other superheroes, and Deus Ex Machina to finally take Carnage down.
Over the years, the comics have had mixed opinions. Some enjoy the overall inner conflict of whether or not superheroes should take the lives for the greater good, while others lambast the good bomb Deus Ex Machina and over-reliance on guest stars. It's even been rumored that the series was nicknamed Maximum Garbage at Marvel headquarters.
1 year after the comic release, this game finally let players interact directly with the comic story. And interact they did, as the game cutscenes were lifted directly from the pages of the issues themselves. Small motions were even added to parts of the panel, making this one of the first crude examples of motion comics. The rest of the graphics steer toward the obvious comic book style. Colors are for the most part vibrant, even when they're relegated to grays and browns on the majority of the enemies. The music is mostly standard fare. The rock group Green Jello provided the game's music, but the rock tunes failed to lift up the soundtrack past par. Specifically, the music from the comic transition sequences becomes a bit repetitious, even during the first playthrough. Here is where the greatest rift between the two console versions is truly felt. While the Super Nintendo sound is a reasonable facsimile of your local garage band, the Genesis version simply sounds tinny and lacks the dynamic range from its competitor's audio. The gameplay is a basic beat-em-up. You play as Spider-Man or Venom as you punch, kick, and web your way through the streets of New York into your final confrontation with Carnage. Despite having 2 characters, the game is limited to a single player. You'll start off as just Spider-Man, but once Venom enters the story, he becomes a fully playable character. At some points the story branches, and you must choose between one spider or the other for a few levels. Similar to some other beat-em-ups, even the standard enemies get their own names. Then your bashing of heads can come with a personal touch. You'll find that you can vent your frustration for the Star Wars prequels, remember the Alamo, or even take on the Game Chasers. In addition to these standard enemies, you'll find yourself face to face with the same 5 bosses multiple times. Shriek, Doppelganger, Carrion, Demogoblin, and of course, Carnage.
Now, in the interest of coming clean, I think I need to set an example for my future progeny. Excuse me while I record a message for my son. Luke, I am your father. No, that's not it. That's pretty obvious and a misquote to boot. No, Luke, your father is a no-good cheater. I used Game Genie to get through Maximum Carnage. I just thought you should know.
This game is hard. The regular enemies are for the most part easy, but the bosses are an entirely different story. There is rarely a time when you'll be facing just a single boss. Instead, you'll be assaulted by 2 or more of them at once. It becomes quite difficult to take advantage of each character's weakness while the others are still assailing you at the same time. However, this is very indicative of the comic series it is based off of. In just about each issue, you'll find the heroes fighting off the same few villains, only to be beaten back or have them get away. The frustration of the comic heroes is shared by the gamer in having to fight the same foes again and again. The masses of random people attacking you also comes from the story, as Shriek was channeling everyone's inner negative emotions. Most of the other superheroes that help Spidey out are included as power-up icons that attack most or all of the enemies on the screen, depending on the hero. The only one absent from the comics to cartridge transition is Nightwatch, due to him mostly doing nothing. But all other guest stars have made the jump, so you can utilize the talents of Black Cat, Cloak and Dagger, Firestar, Deathblock, Iron Fist, Morbius, and Captain America.
While the game's story follows the same basic outline as the comic series, don't expect to follow it easily. Plot points sometimes feel like they've picked at random, and comic panels are used for artistic flair. They make the prettiest pictures on screen, but don't help the story flow.
Yes, I'm nitpicking here, but if you're going to streamline a story, you shouldn't include development that your hardware can't keep up with. Foremost in my mind is Dagger's death. In the comics, she is killed by Shriek, but eventually comes back to life. However, in the game, she is killed by Carnage. It starts with Carnage using one of his standard attack animations toward Dagger. Then some comic panels are supposedly telling me the Dagger is now dead. However, since Carnage never killed Dagger in the comics, no one references that fact. Add to it the fact that the animation doesn't do it justice, and you have an utterly confusing plot point. Then she just comes back as an icon later with absolutely no fanfare. Would it have been too much to ask to have Dagger fade away like the enemies do when you beat them? Things wouldn't have been so muddled then. Why even throw in that subplot?
However, there are a few aspects of the game that entirely encapsulate the feelings from the source material. They immerse the gamer, making them feel exactly what Spider-Man himself felt in the pages of the comics.
Firstly is the frustration the game causes. Spidey feels the exact same way in the story, so as a gamer, you are now feeling the same emotion as you fight increasingly difficult battles. Then at the end, you've played through the game and just fought a brutally difficult battle against Carnage. The credits start to roll. Oh my gosh, Carnage is alive! Yes, this game includes a fake credit roll, but it fits perfectly with the story. See, Carnage was also thought dead in the comics. He had faked his death to lull the superheroes into a false sense of safety, but then attacked again. I'd say the gamer is just as surprised as our tight-wearing superhero if they didn't already know the story arc. It's even more powerful than the original, since you know his death in issue 13 of 14 obviously wouldn't be the end. There's still one more issue.
Speaking of issues, I found this somewhat interesting. While reading through my comics recently, I found LJN advertising their other titles within the pages of Maximum Carnage. It's a Marvel LJN loop!
Other than some small gripes, the game is playable, which is mostly unexpected since it was published by LJN. Poor LJN, stuck publishing the titles Acclaim didn't want, it will be known forever for those subpar games. The difficulty and irregular story progression cause it the most harm, but the passable music, colorful graphics, and control keep it from falling down into one of those LJN games.
Well, I never expected a game that I had never played to be tied with so much of my childhood. In looking back, I discovered a flawed, yet still playable game. While I can't recommend it to everyone, you can still pick it up if you're into a good, challenging beat-em-up. Heck, you can even plug in the good old Game Genie and cheat like me. Money-wise, I've seen it mostly for $10 or less, regardless of whether it's a Super Nintendo or Genesis version, so it won't break the bank. One great thing about growing up is having the disposable income to buy comics and games from our past. At least until the kid arrives. Remember to enjoy your games, comics, toys, or whatever, and share them with your future generation, because in the end, you don't stop gaming because you grow old. You grow old because you stop gaming.